Hello, and welcome to On the Irregular with me, Java Berry, a podcast where I chat to women from all walks of life about their own unique creative journey, how they got here, how their story has shaped their creative work, what they've learned, what has helped them, and where they plan to go from here. It's an irregular journey for so many of us, and I am delighted to offer a platform to share these fascinating stories and wells of wisdom. This week, I'm chatting to visual artist, community builder, photographer, Jo Melia. Jo and I chatted about growing up and living with her mum's alcoholism and the impact this had on her creative dreams, parenting and being part of a neuro-divergent family, her experiences of art school, her years working full-time in a bank and setting up a makeup business on her own with 2 young children, the value of community and the unique skills each of us have to offer. Since we recorded this episode in early January as it snowed outside, Jo has continued further down her personal creative path and is currently absorbed in working with paint on canvas. These creative shifts are also something we touch upon. Welcome to episode 7 with the thoughtful soul and queen of earthy colour palettes, Jo Melia. So you wrote a little bit in your email to me about growing up and about, I guess, because we were chatting about, what was your childhood dream, what did you want to do? Would you mind chatting to me a bit about that, about your childhood and?
Yeah, where to start? It's a funny one, really. I'd say it's only been just over a year since I lost my mum last year, the end of September. So I'd say the last sort of year I've definitely had the opportunity really to think about my childhood, as you do with the whole phase of living with your parent. So I'd say my childhood up until sort of teen years was really joyful, and I have a lot of really great memories of that. My mum and dad both worked sort of several jobs to sort of make ends meet. In Hebden Bridge, my dad was a police officer, and my mum did all sorts, along with working at local bars in Hebden over the years. But I've got a lot of happy memories, and a lot of things that I've realised I kind of transfer over to my children now. So I have a lot of traditions and things that I realise that I get a little bit caught up in, and I feel as though it's important, like there's certain things we do at birthdays and Christmases. And James always laughs at me that I've got this weird thing about hot chocolate. It's like, you always roll out the hot chocolate every time there's something happening. Like if we go for a walk, you're like, oh, we'll take flasks of hot chocolate. And I'm like, I know, but when you just have those like little memories from when you were little. And obviously when I was little, I didn't really realise that there was any kind of things going on with my mum. But I'd say probably around the age of 8, I kind of learned, well, she sat me down and told me that I had a half brother. And I think from there, everything kind of unravelled a little bit, because it became sort of more apparent as time went on that my mum was probably a little bit uncertain, and she really struggled with her mental health, although obviously at the time I didn't really have a clue what that was. I just kind of knew that she was very passionate, very loving, very creative, but equally could be so depressed and so down, and everybody in the house would feel it. And my mum, as with assuming many people of that generation, masked it with drinking. She was always sat on the floor with a glass of brandy at 3:00 in the morning. She wasn't a kind of crazy party drinker, but she used it very much for comfort. But as the years went on, it kind of made things a bit more difficult. And I suppose I learned through her that it was great to be creative, but the emotional side of things, I always really struggled with, because I felt just as deeply as she did, but I felt ashamed of that because I kind of saw how that unravelled and, showed itself with my mum. So when you asked the question about did I have any dreams as a child, what I might want to do, I really found it hard, actually. I've thought about that question quite a few times over the last sort of few weeks since I read it. And I couldn't visualize anything because I think I just felt so like absorbed in everybody else's feelings in the house, especially when you grow up in an environment where things are uncertain and 1 minute things are very happy and wonderful and dancing in the kitchen and baking and all those lovely traditional memories, and then the other sides of I have a particular vision, without sounding too depressing because it wasn't always like that, but of getting back from a caravanning holiday and my mum just going in some crazy rage about something. And I think, understanding myself now, I think she'd just gone from one kind of happy situation, being out of the house, being able to socialise, had too much to drink, come home and felt the weight of life on her shoulders. And I remember her telling me off and asking me to brush the stairs, like instead of vacuuming, we used to kind of hand brush the stairs down. And I remember just having all these feelings of like, oh, like I can't even describe it, to be honest. It was just a lot of weight, I'd say. I carried a lot of her weight for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. And I think I gradually obviously managed to come around it, but it takes a while.
Yeah, and that's really hard when you're a kid, and like you said, you don't understand what's happening with your parents. All you're understanding is what they're communicating to you, and they're setting the mood for the house. So you have no control really in that situation. You're at the mercy of these big emotions that you can't understand, and that sounds like a lot. That sounds like a lot to deal with as a child, and then to revisit as an adult, I guess, to try and understand. And it sounds like you've got a pretty clear grasp of it now, I suppose, having become a parent and just with time and with age. But so I can imagine that maybe there wasn't a lot of space for dreams in that.
Well, no, I don't suppose so, because I think even, like myself, I've just listened to when you and John were chatting in the kitchen, and I think a lot of mine and James's conversations are really similar. We kind of dream up all sorts of things now, and he's always asking me what I would love to do, and if I could do anything, and I've always had a huge block on it, like, and I don't know if it's because it's not because I'm unable to come up with ideas, because I have loads of ideas, loads and loads, far too many, I'd say. But I think, and it's not the kind of creating things either, because I'd say between us, we're very capable of making things happen. We can really drive things, and put energies into it. And that's what we have managed to do over the years, all being kind of, lots of variations. We've done a lot of different kind of jobs over the years, and explored lots of different avenues. But I don't know, it's kind of, he always asked me, and I've always had this block, and I used to be really fearful of it. It was a bit of a punch in the stomach, almost like, why can't I have this dream? Why can't I just come out with it? But I think through kind of really processing things and learning from my own children, I guess, and chatting to other people, and I've probably had therapy now for on and off for the last 5 years, just because of the different circumstances. And I guess what's great about that in this day and age really is that you get to learn a lot more, and understand a lot more of those kind of, reasons why you find things difficult, or behaviors and and that kind of thing. And I definitely am finding it a lot easier now, to be able to come up with dreams and ideas of things. I think it's perhaps constantly being the one that has to think about everybody else's, energies. I'd definitely say I'm affected by energies quite a lot. I don't really understand it in a huge amount of detail, other than that, they can be absolutely overwhelming. So yeah. But it is nice when you can get into your own space, and I think that's kind of what I've been working towards for the past 10 or more years. And it's just such a lovely thing to feel. I think when you've spent a lot of your life feeling anxious and worried about what other people's energies are like and how you will manage those, it's so freeing to be able to realize that you've got your own. And you know, I mean, I'm 43 and I'm probably only just beginning to realize that, you know, there's lots of possibilities of things that you can do with your time, really. And a lot of that changes when you've had kids as well, doesn't it? Because, you know, that I don't think I ever thought I would have them. That's so weird. It's so weird to think, considering I've got 3. I was literally like, I don't know what it was. I think I wasn't terrified of having children, but I think I was just like, yeah, I just don't know if I could do it. And I was very anxious as a child and a teenager. So I think I was just like, I think I'm going to die giving birth. Like, I got myself into this headspace of like, that's not physically possible. And then went on to have 3 of them. And I can honestly say, like, you know, as hard as those experiences were and all encompassing, I'd still say those moments of bringing life are still so blooming incredible. You know, like, each one of them is very different, as are, you know, each of the 3 children are really different, and 2 of them feel like they're on the way to becoming young adults now, which is a whole different ball game. In many ways, as we have discussed in previous times. There's lots of very amusing things that come with owning 2 teenagers. I'll have to hope they don't listen to this, because they'll be like, oh no, Mum, don't say it. But yeah, it's just, there's obviously points in life that make you kind of realize that, you know, life is really precious, and I guess along with bringing life and seeing it disappear, there's a lot of moments within that almost kind of push you to go, right, well, what's next then? You know, what am I here for? All the big, I guess I'm probably always here for the big questions. It seems really silly, because in my everyday I do a lot of very, I don't even want to say dull, but very mundane kind of daily things. I'm always the one sweeping the floor. I'm always folding the clothes and doing all of that. But I do have quite a balance going on in my body and my mind at the moment, that I feel as though I kind of need to work a bit more on being outside of that kind of physical, you know, that physical kind of persona.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not that's something that a lot of parents go through, that kind of, you know, you kind of build yourself into what it's like to be a parent and what you want that to look like.
Like the dynamics of everyday parenthood, and I guess it's that thing of reconnecting with your soul, and the more ethereal bit that I suppose isn't as useful when it comes to sweeping the floor. Although, you know, you can do some great daydreaming when sweeping the floor.
Yes.
But coming back to that bit, and I think that's possibly often what leads to those feelings of frustration and depression, is having so little time to simply be, because you're endlessly needed. You're needed all the time, and it can be crushing. I watched The Lost Daughter last night, Maggie Gyllenhaal's film with Olivia Colman. Have you seen it yet?
I've not, but I will.
Okay, yeah. Prepare yourself for some big feelings.
Well, I think I spoke to one of our mutual friends. I don't know how to do this in podcast world, but Laurie from Dear Prudence, and she said, I think you and I had both watched what was it called, Made, as in MAID, more or less at the same time, or perhaps I must have watched it the week before, and I was sort of chatting to Laurie about it, and then she said that you'd either called her or messaged her with very similar kind of feelings. Just a lot came from that, so I'd be interested to watch it. I might have to wait a week to kind of get into a slightly different headspace. I never realized that those kind of things, because sometimes they just come so out of the blue, don't they? How that kind of, you know, how music affects you, how a moment in time can just completely blow your mind, and you're not expecting it to kind of come. And that equally can be in a great way as well, can't it? It's not always in that kind of heaviness, but I definitely agree with you. I've definitely felt those moments of, you know, even up to very recently. I think one of the things that we negotiate a lot on a regular basis, and I do talk about it in a lot of our kind of written work on the website, and if I ever do any kind of post on Instagram, I try and talk a lot about having a neurodivergent family, just because that's kind of what's come to light quite a lot in the last I'd say in the last 5 or 6 years, as an official kind of, diagnosis point of view, rather than a parent knowing feeling. But yeah, there's a lot of different things that we've got. The two boys are from my previous marriage, but we've lived with James since they were sort of 4 and 5, 4 and 6. And then we've got Margot, and James was diagnosed with ADHD, or attention deficit disorder, with a little bit of hyperactivity still, just to kind of tick that box. He made sure that he got that one in there, bless him. And I think and Logan has a few other bits and pieces that we manage through school and through a lot of things, a lot of work at home. A lot of resilience building, a lot of understanding of kind of different, it's not just different ways of thinking either, it's different ways of processing, different ways of behaving. And it feels like a little bit of I'm trying to describe it. It does very much feel like walking through the woods when there's loads of kind of brambles and stuff everywhere, because it's so beautiful, and you can kind of see the creative opportunities in these wonderful minds working. But because we have to tread through all the standard kind of schooling and workplaces and accounts and all that stuff that is just part of daily life, it's just an interesting game to be playing. I think that's the only way I can kind of describe it.
That's a perfect way of putting it.
Yeah. It's funny actually, because for some odd reason, when I was growing up, my dad used to love anything sci-fi, so we used to watch Star Trek together, and James thinks it's kind of hilarious that I kind of know loads of stuff about Star Trek. But over Christmas, I think me and the boys have watched loads of kind of superhero type stuff, like Superman, because me and my dad watched that in the 80s, and we've watched all the new ones, and I watched Hunger Games, and I think me and James had a conversation about how life does very much feel like a bit of a game at times, and you have to play it to a certain, you don't have to play it to other people's, expectations, but you have to be willing to kind of push through those standards of expectation. And I very much feel as though our generation are the ones that have been able to understand more about mental health and possibilities, I guess, like changing things going on, but we're also the ones to try and implement the new changes and make sure that our own kids kind of grow up in a healthy, safe environment. And yeah, it feels like an incredible opportunity, to be honest, but equally it's quite weighty. Yeah. Just in that, that I certainly don't want any of my children to grow up, or any child to grow up feeling as though they are lacking or too much. There's both sides to that.
It's kind of been gradually working towards it, hasn't it? And then it just feels like it's become more of a social, open conversation, and it's taken for granted that we talk about mental health. There's still a lot of work to be done, but yeah, that we're still doing all of our work, and we're having children thinking like, right, well, I think how am I going to get it right? And it's accepting that I'm not going to get it right, even though I have
still all the information.
Yeah, I'm still going to mess up, and my kids will probably still end up in therapy. But hopefully the world will just keep on allowing them more opportunities to discuss, what they're feeling, what they want, and equip them with the vocabulary and the ideas to understand that and express it, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think having children, not just children, but a partner, obviously, as well, that is neurodiverse. There's got to be an appreciation within that of, there's a lot of information out there at the moment, which is incredible. I don't want to say that it's not useful to have Instagram pages with memes on about ADHD. It's not a bad thing that our children understand or asking questions about other forms of diversity. It's incredible that they have that information available to them and they're able to ask those questions in a safe environment within their homes and with their peers. But there's an element of it that I have to grasp onto, and it's that kind of with neurodiverse minds and creative minds in particular, there's a lot of scope for changes. There's a lot of different ways. Like, I think I've had conversations with all of my kids in the last sort of 10 years, and some of them have really surprised me when I felt that kind of horrible heaviness of worry and I don't know how we're going to get through this. We've had moments where, perhaps one of the children, we had a Labrador. You might hear the dogs in a bit. We've always had animals, but we had a particular dog for quite a few years. And Logan would come home from school and he would just cuddle up with the dog on the floor. Like, he didn't care where they were. He would just kind of spoon the dog on the floor when he got home from high school. And that was his way of kind of reconnecting with his comfortable space, with his home space, and he wasn't putting on any kind of front to behave well at school or do all the things that was expected of him. And he connected his breathing with the dog on the floor, and after half an hour he'd kind of come round again and be able to sort of join in with whatever we were doing. And there are times when I see things like that, and I have done over the years, where as being a parent, you're kind of like, oh God, that's such a big feeling, to see him doing that and know that that's your child that needs that, and allow it. But then there's got to be some wonder in that they're learning ways of connecting, they're learning ways of kind of calming themselves, they're being allowed to be themselves. And I find this not only with the children, but with James as well. I always used to joke and say that it was a bit like a big puppy, which is really not very kind sounding, to be honest. I don't mean that in a sort of immature way, but he does bound at things with this amazing energy and enthusiasm, and what's the best word, and there's an innocence there, as well as kind of a curiosity, I'd say. I think that's definitely what's driven both of us in the last 10 years of being together and working together, has been that curiosity. And we're always the people that will come away from chatting to somebody and will be like, oh my God, I love them, I love that person, or that was so great. Just get this amazing feeling from spending time with people and hearing their stories and how they've managed things or how they've gone about something or whatever. And there's just, I never want to sort of, we were talking recently about how there's all these different neurodiverse terms out there. And sometimes you kind of end up feeling like that's all you are, just a kind of diagnosis or a term, or especially when it's becoming so familiar in all these languages now that, oh, well, if you have, if you're dyslexic or if you're dyspraxic, have you ever done this? And they've done it kind of joking. You go, oh my God, that's me. And then you think, oh, but I'm not special now. Everybody does that. And it's that me and James had a bit of a joke about it over Christmas. And we were like, well, basically, obviously, James was diagnosed with ADD in the first lockdown, mainly because we were really struggling to kind of work at home as well as having all three children at home, and he was finding it increasingly difficult to kind of focus, and just having periods where I wouldn't say it was like a depression, but I'm not even going to be able to remember the term for it now, but I'll try and remember. But it's kind of like, it's a bit like a depression, but it's specifically attached to ADHD, where you kind of just go into this shameful kind of thought process where you just think, I ruin everything, I kind of always do things wrong, and there's no explanation to the feeling either. Sometimes you just kind of say it was a bit like being in a dark hole and I couldn't get out. So we kind of had to approach it at that point because there was no other way. We were kind of all at home, as were so many people, just living every day in their own spaces, with their own people, in their own heads, with their own things around them. There was no choice really, was there, but to kind of just go all in because you were all just kind of there doing it. But there was a lot of great things that kind of came out of that, and also a lot more exploration. Like, I think we're thinking it's possible that it might be transferred through to Margot. It is hereditary, so we're already picking up on little bits and pieces without forcing a diagnosis on her, just to be there to listen, to pay attention to her needs and her behaviours. And there's something really magical in opening it up and going, actually, just because it takes a half an hour to eat a breakfast, I'm not saying that's just an ADHD thing, by the way, I'm pretty sure that's quite normal, but without touching something or without getting up like 20 different times because she's thought about something else she might want to get up and do or touch or see. We're kind of making it into a bit of a game now, and same with getting ready. And I suppose it just makes you turn things around a bit, doesn't it? It's like you've just got to kind of twist it up a bit and go, well, what else can we do then?
Yeah.
You know,
and that reminds me of what you were saying earlier about how life is a game, and it's like finding your way through that. I often think that with our kids, like if I could just flip it, and instead of telling them off, it's like, okay, let's just find a different way, this would be so much more fun. But you know, I think it's really, really powerful if you can do that. I always think that I'd be a bit better at it if I got a bit more sleep.
Well, do you know, I was going to say that to you before. Like, I think sometimes as a parent, you do give yourself quite a hard time about it. But you know, we've very much in the last couple of years been living in the spaces with our children, and you know that we're very much keen on seeing what they're doing and how they're developing and what they're doing, and you kind of get involved quite a lot, don't you? And we were chatting the other day saying how, you know, you would have previously had times where you'd been like, just go, you know, your mum would have said, just go play, just go just go outside, just, you know, have your own space, have your own time, whereas we're kind of in there all the time, so it is quite hard. And I very much felt the same. I think I said to you earlier, they've only just all gone back to school after Christmas, and I think not yesterday but the day before, I suddenly had this like feeling, the thought of kind of dropping this mother role that I've very much taken on in the last 3 weeks, and you know, being in the house with them, trying to be entertaining, you know, trying to feed them, clothe them, wash them, all that kind of thing. And like you said with your boys, you know, they can be very intense, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that, you know, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of feelings, and I definitely agree with you that if you can give yourself space, it's easier to be more creative with your parenting, isn't it? If you can give yourself that, even just like half a day out, I feel like a different person when I come back.
Yeah, definitely. I was talking about this the other day, actually, I think on Zoom for the workshop, that I always come back to the analogy of the glass balls and the plastic balls, and it's about juggling them and knowing which ones you can let drop to the floor and they'll survive, and which ones, they're the glass ones, you've got to keep those up. And sometimes they're the ones that you think that you can let go because you can just ignore them. But I think one of the key ones is mental health and prioritizing yourself, because if you let that one drop, then everything else crumbles. And I know it's so hard to do. Like, I am such a culprit of it, of just kind of pushing that to the back and say, oh yeah, I'll go for a walk later, or I'll have a bath another day, because there's just too many things to be done. But then it just builds up and builds up and builds up, and 2 years later, you know, you have a breakdown or something. You know, and same like you were saying, you can't be the parent that your children deserve, or you'll stop enjoying parenting, and your kids aren't going to be enjoying you. So it's never going to be perfect, but trying to find that balance and trying to prioritize yourself, it just makes everything so much easier. But again, it's that, you know, finding that space. If you don't have childcare, if you don't have anyone that can give you that respite, even if it's just for half an hour, for an hour, you know, that's when things start to really get quite scary. And
I think, I know, when I was thinking about my own parents and you know, the imagining or trying to remember some of the things that we did together, because you know, you try and go, well, what did I remember, you know, what was important to me as a child, what are those lovely memories? And they're not always, are they? They're not the big things that they probably thought they did. It won't be any of that stuff. It'll sometimes just be the kind of little day-to-day things. But it is just having those little openings of time. And I know certainly when my mum was alive, and we were more in contact with each other, things did break down over the last 4 years, but when we were in contact with each other, my mum was really hardworking, and I think she only actually retired maybe 7 years before she died. So she found it really hard to stop. Like, my mum always needed a purpose. She always needed to be doing something. She was always knitting or coming up with a new business project in her 70s. There was always something she was coming up with. She was like, she was really intellectual with my mum, and didn't get the chance to go to uni because they just couldn't afford it really. And then she ended up with a son when she was 19. So there was a lot of kind of built up missing moments, I think, for her. And she used to listen to the radio and hear all the politics and stuff, or she'd hear about somebody famous that had died, and she'd mourn them like she knew them. She was just so full of like feeling. And I still laugh now because she'd sort of she'd listen to the radio and she'd hear some politicians kind of arguing, and she'd have some major theory on what was going on, but she'd forget that I'd not heard like half of this conversation that she'd been listening to, and she'd ring me and just be like, all this stuff. Then she'd get really angry, oh, this is going on, and I'd think, oh goodness me. But I don't know, there's just some great moments that have kind of happened, and I think more than anything, as we sort of get older, I'm realizing that it's not always about kind of the opportunities that you've had in front of you or how much you've been striving to get somewhere. It's very much about the kind of bits in between, isn't it? It's a cliche, but it is literally all about the journey, and all those ups and downs just really help to shape who you are and where you're going. And you don't always have, I don't know, you don't always get a choice, do you? I very much feel these days that a choice, we definitely try and make sure the kids know that they can make choices and they can do whatever they want to do, in the same way that obviously myself and James are both self-employed, and we have been for the last sort of 10, 12 years. We always say, you can do what you want. And I think the older the kids get, the boys get, they're like, what do you mean? What do you mean I can do whatever I want, even down to the 15-year-old who was saying the other day, maybe you could get a job. Maybe you're kind of eating a tin of ravioli in your bedroom with a fork when it's cold, and maybe it's time that you just go and earn some of your own ravioli money. And he was like, well, I could do some washing up. It's like, you don't really like doing it at home. Yes, you could totally do some washing up.
You talked a bit about how, you really loved singing, and you always you always kind of felt creative urges, and you spent a lot of time thinking and writing and reading, like you said, listening to music, and so you managed to find your way to going to uni to study visual arts, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Went to uni in Salford. I didn't go through the standard route. I did my A-levels. I got glandular fever at the same time as doing my A-levels, so I did struggle to be in school a lot, and I'd already found more conceptual art, so don't think the teachers really agreed with the kind of things that I was producing for my A-level art stuff. So I think in the end I got like a D or something, but yeah, I managed to kind of go to college, did a foundation degree, and then applied to quite a few different ones. They all terrified me, to be honest, going to the interviews. And in the end, it was actually somebody that knew one of the tutors at Salford University that it wasn't even part of the route either. She just said, I've got this student, she loves conceptual art, she's really passionate about it. I think at the time I'd been I'd been making installations out of things like coffee, been painting with coffee, and painting with fabric conditioner. I was literally all about the kind of sensory experience. I'm sure I did other things that were more kind of sensible with my art foundation, but yeah, I kind of got put forward to this lovely guy, and I went for an interview with him, a guy called Paul. And he was a bit off the wall, and the interview was so different to the ones I'd had in the like traditional kind of education houses. Um, the interviews were so weird. Like I think one was in Cumbria, and it was quite professional. I loved the studios. I felt so excited going in them all, and I always just used to think, oh, I can't imagine being here. Like this is for real artists. And I remember I was really into makeup at the time, which another avenue I've gone down, but I was very much into drawing my face up like a 60s star. So I used to kind of full on do the eyeliner and the crease in the eyelid. And I remember I had an interview at Derby, and I remember going all done up thinking I looked just like an art student. I thought they're definitely going to want me because I'd look the part. I was so nervous. I was so nervous. I think I just froze in the interview, to be honest. I couldn't really kind of get it across. So going into Salford and hearing the very Manchester accents, and it felt so familiar. And I can't describe it any other way. It just felt like it didn't feel like home. It just felt right.
Yeah.
It felt very comfortable, but also like I could really explore different avenues. So I went to Salford for 3 years, which was quite an experience, really. I wouldn't say it's certainly not a vocational degree. Goodness me, it's nothing like that.
Going into it, did you have any idea of where it could possibly take you in the future?
No. No, it was just something that I felt like I was good at. And I was like,
yeah,
not even good at. It was like, right, I have all these thoughts and all these massive feelings, and I can kind of extend them out of my head and my body enough to have an effect on other people. And because my thoughts were quite complex, like when I did my dissertation, still makes me giggle a bit now, but I was trying to explain it to James the other day, and I've told him 100 times what my final show was. And he's like, tell me again what you did. It's like, right, well, I was like, well, I took photographs. So that's when the photography bit kind of started. I had a nice camera. I took photographs of so it was I had a boyfriend at the time, and they were little photographs. They were photographs close up of kind of his, like say his hand kind of curled up, so like the skin all kind of ruched up, and the nape of his neck and other bits and pieces. But I kind of manipulated the images so that the colours were much more vibrant. So any pinks turned to reds and things like that. So they kind of looked a bit like intimate areas. Honestly, if I could, I will one day share those photographs with you, because my dad, being a policeman from Hebden Bridge, was a bit like, what the heck are you doing? And obviously I was so proud. I got when I put it all together, because they gave me the main space in the exhibition hall, and I was like, wow, can't believe I got this, considering it was so weird. And I printed them out so they were exactly the right size, as though they could be quite intimate kind of areas, and I literally pinned them to the wall in that position, so you couldn't think they were anything other than that. And they were literally like probably 15 to 20 of them in this main space. And I still remember now my dad coming in and just looking and going, oh,
this is what you went to uni for.
And he'll still joke now, I can't believe I paid for that. I'm like, yeah. But I loved it. And I met people there. There was myself and another guy that he was the only one in our year that got a first. I think I was quite close by with mine, because I'd gone really down the conceptual route. Yeah, my dissertation, I basically went to see the Sensation show, the Saatchi Sensation show, and I was massively inspired by how crazy and hideous a lot of those things were, and how, like, in my small mind, I was just like exploring all these new avenues. So I spent most of my last year researching quite feminist kind of topics, I guess. Mm-hmm. So they're all very much about how over the years of art, kind of, it started off as men viewing women and painting them, and they weren't allowed to look at them. And then obviously they were allowed to look at women from a voyeur point of view. But I went right into the newer kind of generation and the feminist generation, where they would be literally doing kind of, full explorations into the female body. And it was all about kind of the idea that women had overflowing boundaries, that their skin was overflowing, their bodily fluids were overflowing. I know this is probably a bit graphic, but, their emotions were overflowing. They were too much, there was always going to be too much. And I loved exploring that and showcasing that wasn't necessarily the case, that it's beautiful in all its different ways. And it's funny because I've only just recently kind of come back to the fact that I did study feminism in that time, and I'd not really kind of connected with it or ever thought that I was kind of very certain about those ideas. Because when I finished my degree, I went straight into a very normal job and met a very sort of sensible person, and settled into a very kind of standard life, I'd say.
And was it something that you'd thought that you wanted? Because you must have been very young.
No, but I think the combination of growing up with somebody who wasn't particularly stable, who had these massive dreams and her own kind of massive feelings and these needs that she had that weren't met, but also having my dad, who was very stable, very straightforward, always there, always has been there, such a incredible kind of stabilizing figure in my life. I kind of wanted to go back to that. I felt as though I'd gone too far outside my boundaries. And I needed to kind of show that it was worth putting that investment into me. So I already worked for a bank while I was doing my degree for money. And I just went full time into doing that. And it was probably, I don't want to say it was the worst thing I ever did, because you learn from everything that you do. You really do. But I don't think it did anything for my confidence whatsoever. I completely lost sight of who I was.
Wow, God, that's such a contrast from what seems like at uni, really pushing your boundaries and exploring and going really quite deep and doing some pretty kind of far out stuff. So, right, I'm now going to go work in a bank. I mean, if that's not pulling back, I don't know what is,
I worked in a bank. My mum and my stepdad worked in a golf club, so I'd work there on a weekend. I met a guy that played golf there that was, to be honest, not the greatest, without going into too much detail. And unfortunately, because I didn't have a lot of self-love through the experiences with whatever happened in the past, I kind of was guided, I very much followed the route. I dressed differently, I looked different, I starved myself, I didn't really eat very well. I just felt as though I was too much all the time. And he told me I was too much as well, to be honest. So
that again, that's the in mirroring what you were talking about, women overflowing, emotions overflowing, skin overflowing, and then you try and make yourself smaller and less of you.
I absolutely made myself smaller. Yeah. And it's funny because James saw the other side in me as soon as we met, which is quite funny, because in between that, I'd met the boy's dad, who was a wonderful guy, very straight down the line, really caring, really nurturing, came from a really kind of steady family background. And at that time, it was just what I needed. I was working in the bank, so was he. I felt as though he understood me. We could talk about similar things when we got home. And they just took me in with open arms at a time when I felt very, unsure of what was going on and who I was supposed to be. And as much as we're not together anymore, and it was, it's such a difficult thing to admit to, but it was my choice. It was my choice because I think I eventually, when I turned 30 and had both the boys, thought, what on earth is this life I'm living? What on earth am I doing here? How did I get here? I was still working in a bank. I was a manager at that point, and it was killing me. It was absolutely killing me doing that job. I tried to make it as kind of creative as I could. I ran a team of people, and I was always coming up with new ideas to kind of inspire them and incentivize them. But we were in a real sales team, so working in like commercial banking, or retail banking. So just, as soon as you'd push them and got them to the point where we delivered results, you'd be right back down to the beginning. And the retail managers, they were filtering down every morning, like, you didn't do enough, you've got to do better tomorrow, got to do better tomorrow. So every day you would be going through this cycle of like psychologically having to build your team up and then cut them at the end of the day and go, well done, but we've got to do better. And there was a lot more that went on with it than just that. And I still remember now, I'd had Logan, and he had he wasn't ill when he was born, but he had really bad reflux, which I'd never heard of before. And he was poorly probably till he was about 9 months, and he ended up in hospital with bronchiolitis. He wasn't really, really ill, but there were periods of time when I couldn't put him down. It got to that point, and the boys are only like 19, 20 months apart. So it was very tying for somebody that had a lot of creative thoughts. I guess that's probably the best way of saying it. And I remember I had this management role, and I actually worked for another bigger bank, and they were just closing it all down at the time. They were closing sections down and selling them off. And it was literally at that point where you daren't tell them that you were expecting. Because even though you'd think in that day and age, that must have been sort of 12, 13 years ago, that you'd potentially get fired and completely lose your job. So it was absolutely terrifying to kind of be building your family at that point. And I just thought, this can't be a way of living, I can't be living in this way. And I went back in. I still remember, actually, they asked me if I could go in for a meeting a week after I'd had Logan, when I was breastfeeding in Leeds. And I was like, no. Can you imagine?
Jesus.
It was just all a bit crazy. And yeah, I remember them, I'd had some time off, and they'd had to kind of they involved the union because there was loads of other rubbish going on. There was a lot of bullying, like internal kind of stuff going on, and manipulation. And they'd paid thousands of pounds to send people to London for this course. And I'd been doing a bit of CBT while I'd been off, because Logan was so poorly. I'd got into kind of a trauma state, because I couldn't put him down, and I just felt constantly on high alert, because he used to choke quite a lot with it. And I just remember I'd been doing some CBT in my home life, and then I'd gone to this course. I was like, go on then, I'll go and do it. I'll do this as a last kind of push and see if it works. And they literally did this weird kind of, it was almost like they did CBT on us. They brought in this training team that did CBT on us, but it was to get us to sell things to people. My mind was blown, and I'm quite diplomatic, to be fair. I think that's definitely something that I've learned over the years. I'm usually quite diplomatic, and I went with a friend who was massively outspoken, and she was flipping brilliant, to be honest. I think at the time I was cringing, but she was like, why are you telling us that? Why are you getting us to do this? We were there for a week in this beautiful hotel that was outside the London Eye. I could literally see it from a very expensive bedroom window. And I was like, what are they doing? This is literally brainwashing, absolutely ridiculous. And I came back, and they basically said, we don't have any management jobs for part-time workers. You're either going to have to come in full-time, which we couldn't do, or you're going to have to, take a different role. So basically the year's worth of experience that I'd built up to become a manager, they just wanted me to go right back on the front line and be paid the same, which was amazing, but go right back to working on the front line doing the cashiering. And I just didn't have it in me to do it. I couldn't bring myself to do that.
Yeah.
So I quit.
Wow. And did you have any idea, because with 2 kids, that's a brave decision to make. Also shows just how awful it must have felt working in those circumstances.
I don't know. I don't know if it was brave. I think I'd just got to the point where I'd been ground down that much. I don't think I knew what else to do. And my husband at the time had been also in. We worked together. You know, I said we worked in for the same company, and he'd been off. He'd been off sick for 6 months through some internal kind of bullying that had gone on. So we were in quite a vulnerable position anyway, and none of it felt safe. But I just thought, I've got to make a change. You know, something's got to change here. And I'd been doing a bit of makeup. It was a bit of something for me, you know, while the boys were small. I used to, whenever they had the naps, I'd go and practice and do an hour, and I'd go and do the school run with like a full-on 50s face. But I loved it. It was just, it wasn't like sort of pushing myself to be a different person, but I just loved being able to create every day, you know, be able to kind of try something new and new techniques and learning. And yeah, that's kind of where that went next. So yeah, I ended up setting up my own makeup business. I went to London and did a week's course with 2 makeup artists that they'd done incredible things. I think their aunt was Princess Diana's makeup artist, so obviously they'd come from a family full of artists anyway.
Makeup royalty.
Yeah, something like that. And actually, it feels really weird now saying this, but they were literally like YouTube royalty at the time. They were some of the first people that did tutorials online. So yeah, meeting them was really weird, and I literally left my 1-year-old and 3-year-old at home with my husband for the week. Just was like, see ya.
That must have felt pretty lovely.
Oh gosh, yeah, it was great to spend the week with my sister as well, you know, just going to I mean, I was terrified, but at the same time I've got so many nice memories of eating such lovely food while we were there, and her friends are all really creative and stuff, so we had like dinner parties, and I ended up doing crazy experimental makeup on some of her friends, you know, just to practice and stuff. We've still got all the photos, and one of her roommates was really into Queen, and I grew up listening to Queen, so we had like some sort of evening where he played it all and I sang my heart out in his room. So yeah, it was just a really great experience. But in doing that, when I came back, I was like, yeah, I kind of need to quit my job and set up on my own. So yeah, it meant pulling the kids out of nursery. And, you know, we've talked about this before, and this is one of the difficulties as a compromise for me going, do you know what, I'll set up a business on my own. I then lost my childcare.
It's infuriating and the complete opposite of what it should be, surely.
Yeah, I got more help when I was working for somebody.
Yeah.
Than when I set up on my own. So I kind of doubled up the stress, to be honest, because I was with the boys every day during the week. And then every evening I'd go out and do makeup trials, or, you know, and then at the weekends I'd be doing wedding and kind of occasional makeup. So I built my own wedding makeup business and ended up working in the wedding industry for about 7 years, and that's how I met James. So yeah, I kind of did this course. They taught you how to design your own website, and I just came home, and I think because I was 30 as well, I was in the right position to go, you know, this is my time, and I'm going to do this for my family. I'm going to do something creative, and I'm not going to be pushed into some strange kind of corners. And I was very determined that my business would be done. I mean, it feels really rudimentary now, actually, but I felt as though my business would be kind of, I knew I wanted it to be on an experience level. Like, I always sold the business as they would get me and the experience that came with that. Like, they'd have this nice calm influence. I can't tell you the amount of like wedding dresses I've fastened up, and you know, mums that I've given a hug when they've had a bit of a cry, and I've probably joined in myself. I worked with one of my best friends, Kizzy, for a while. She worked on cruise ships doing hair, so she was a hair master. I can't even describe it. She can just whip stuff up in like no time at all. And we did it as a team for about 3 years, and she didn't drive, so I drove us everywhere. She provided the food. She used to like pass over snacks while we were driving. And it was just it was a difficult time because I'd moved out on my own with the boys, and I lost a lot of weight, and I was really poorly. But it was a lot of fun as well, you know, just being able to kind of just own what we were doing. And
what you were just describing about you know, that you would offer yourself like the whole experience. It wasn't just about what would end up on their face, but it was
No.
about the nurturing and the calm presence. And
Mm.
it makes me think about that's something that you still carry
Yeah.
now when, you know, in the studio with all the scents that you know, making
Yeah.
sure that it smells nice and that the plants are there and that it feels calm, and you know, that's very much who you are. And that's so beautiful that you could identify that so early on as a real value and a real quality that you
Yeah,
know that
because
people
it's not
wanted.
just about, it's silly with makeup saying face value, but it's literally not just going with some nice luxury products and going, I'm going to make you look like so and so. It was always about so much more. And I think I realized, I mean, I gave up doing makeup after Margot was born, because as a full-time or even part-time job, because I just didn't have the time to do that and run the photography business with James and have the family and the home and all that kind of thing. So but yeah, I think what I learned at that point, I gave up on the makeup because it had become a very aesthetic based business. So I would turn up to do jobs and they'd all say, can you make me look like Cheryl Cole or something? And I hated that, because that I very much encourage people to feel like their best selves, like from a more internal point of view. Let's bring out your best features, let's, you don't want to be turning up on that day and not feel like you in your own skin. And that was the avenue, that was the area that I came from. And it became much too, very much about the aesthetics, and it just didn't sit right with me. So and then obviously once I'd met James and I saw how he was creative with the photography and what you could potentially capture, and the way he saw the light and the way the things he saw with people, it just resonated with me in ways that I'd never really come across before. It literally blew my mind when he taught me how to take photographs, and I saw what came out of those. And I know I had quite a lot of friends that probably thought I should have never given up on the makeup business that I'd set up, but I'd tried a lot of things, Java. I've done a lot of different jobs over the years, and I don't know, I think you just sometimes have to go with it, don't you, and
Yeah.
see where
Yeah,
it takes
exactly.
you.
And it's tricky, isn't it? Because I can see how people from the outside might have thought that, but it's weighing it up, isn't it? Like I say, it's weighing it up and what feels comfortable. And just because you're good at something or you excel at something doesn't mean that's the right thing for you to be doing at that time in your life. And you can always come back to it. And, you know, it doesn't. I can understand how friends might think that you're letting yourself down. Oh, but you're so good at that. Why don't you go back to doing that? You know, it's like, well, maybe I will one day, but you know, not right now. And it's not
Right now,
because
yeah.
it's not because I'm stopping myself. It's not because I'm not allowing myself to do something that I love. It's just it's not the right fit for this moment in time.
I think it didn't, at the time, it didn't really align with the new kind of thoughts that I was having,
Mm.
working in the photography industry and spending time with people and watching people's relationships develop, kind of, whatever kind of photography we did, seeing how people had put all the time and effort into creating their own businesses, creating their own products, their own services. There was just something so incredible in photographing families, seeing the different dynamics, and it hit me on a completely different level, did the photography, and I couldn't not go with it. It was one of those, like, once I'd seen the kind of, I'm going to say the light, as in, we called the course Lost in the Light, because literally once you're lost in it, once you can see it, it doesn't go away. And even like the other day, it's been so dull, hasn't it, over Christmas? Like, it really bothers me, because like your house, we live in a barn now, and the windows are really low and really deep, and there's just not a huge amount of light that gets in, even though it's all open plan. And I didn't realize it would really bother me,
Yeah.
until we've just hit this particular kind of winter. And then I went out with a friend the other day, and the sun was out, and I didn't really notice it, and it got really low, and it was just kind of, Margot was just playing, and it started to cast all these shadows, and I could see all the colours and the patterns, and I was like, whoa. I mean, I only had my phone with me. I didn't even have a camera, but it was just so exciting. And there was nothing would ever take that away from me. It was like having that skill of being able to see the light, but also see that light in your own stories, in your own passions, just kind of, it felt right. I think is probably the best way to kind of describe it. And I'm not sure James was massively on board with the whole teaching idea to start with, because he loves shooting. Like that's his language. But my language is very much speaking, as you're probably able to tell.
Yeah, and stories. You're all about words and story. Well, not all about words, but like that, and that's comes across, I guess, in the Instagram account, which you mainly run, don't you?
Yeah,
And it's such a powerful combination between the images and the story that the light tells, and then the stories that your words tell, and it's very much about life. It's a photography account, but it's so much more than that. It's about how you're seeing life and how you're telling the story of your life and those around you. So I think it's a beautiful combination.
Thank you. Thank you. It takes such a while to get to those points though, doesn't it? Like thinking about the different stages. I mean, I don't want to encourage you all to start scrolling through our whole Instagram feed, but what you will see is so many changes, so many shifts, so many like, oh, we'll go down this road. And I think in low points, I've probably thought, I just need to stick to something. And James very much gets that, like, I need a rhythm, I need a routine. People need to see it and go, that's them, or that's him, or, like having that need to kind of, what's the word? Kind of identify with what you're producing or what you look like or any of those things. And I think I'm kind of getting into that time of my life where I do want to identify with what I do and what people see. But I also want to identify within myself. I've kind of got to that point now where, like, being able to share a skill with somebody is incredible, with other creatives that love what they do but really want to be able to capture what they do, or tell their own, even if they're not creative, be able to like tell their own stories or explore avenues that they perhaps felt trapped with before, and they weren't able to kind of try things out. And I guess I learned that community and building communities was probably the best thing that I got out of teaching. And it wasn't something that I initially kind of set it up to be. I don't think I really thought that the community would be the biggest joy of teaching, of running courses, but it's definitely got to the point with us now where we're trying to work out a way of developing it. But I don't know about you, we kind of get to that point where in some ways I don't necessarily want to do it for money. I don't want to have to earn, like, that connection between but in a similar position to you guys, we've got a family to support. We have to earn, we have to find a way of keeping things going on a weekly, monthly basis and make ends meet. It's not always what it looks like.
No, I really understand that, and I guess I would relate to that with the podcast, that the podcast feels very much that it's rooted in community and sharing stories, and same, I don't make any money, it costs me money to host it, and and time and energy, but what it gives back to me and to the people involved, the people that listen, it's worth it. It's hard when you do have to kind of go, yeah, but I need to pay the mortgage, so can I allocate that time? But I guess, it's if you're trying to figure out if you can find those pockets of time to dedicate to it, to feed your soul in a way that isn't connected to money. Definitely.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'd say that with any kind of personal project, going back to when we were saying, that nurturing yourself and really thinking about, in terms of not just your mental health, but the food you eat, the fluids you put in your body, the exercise that you give your body, all those different elements, the things that you read. I think we've kind of become a society that absorb a lot of information these days. There's such a lot. And it's fast paced. And I mean, like I said before, I think I'm naturally quite an anxious person. So that constant influx of information and, different opinions and different kind of aspects that are going on. And not only that, but there's so many opportunities, really. You could try this, you could do this, that could also go wrong, like literally pointing out all these different areas that really you've kind of just got to do something that your heart's in. You've got to dig a little bit deeper and go, to some degree, can I carve out a little bit of time just to do something that, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be to help other people, does it? But I'd certainly say in my case, that's what I'm aiming for now. I'd like to be able to share some of the experiences that have happened over the years, and the journeys, and the way that you kind of learn and share information. And there's a lot been lost without community.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I always come back to what you're just saying, that it's storytelling and it's how we understand the world by sharing our stories with each other. And I think also something you said about, whether people consider themselves as creative or not, it doesn't mean that they don't have a story to tell and to express. And I guess by us all sharing our own stories, then that can encourage and can help others to share their own, and maybe see interest or value in their own story that maybe they didn't think was there, because they didn't think, oh, nobody would be interested in what I have to say, which isn't true. But it's about identifying, isn't it? And
I mean, there's so many different people with different stories and different lifestyles, and I quite often come across, just from teaching the course or having different conversations with people, that they don't feel their own self-worth, or they don't really know where they're going with things, or perhaps it's not even entered their head yet. Maybe they're not even in that, at that point in their life. They're just very much doing what they're doing every day. They're working hard. They've got to pay the bills. They've got to keep going and improving within their work environment. But there's it's just such, I keep saying about balance and things, and we've talked before between the kind of three of us about how it's quite a scary world out there at the moment, and there's lots of things we don't have choice over. There's lots of things we don't necessarily have control over, but in a way, in our little communities, in our small spaces, we really do, and we really can help each other and bring out the best. And I don't know whether or not that's something that can necessarily be done in a solitary space. I really do think that, going back to old communities where there used to be a small village, and there'd be a certain person that was really good at cooking, for instance, and they would share the knowledge of that. And then you'd have somebody that would be, we always talk about, I don't know if you've heard the analogy with ADHD before, but they've compared it to in years gone by, that you would potentially have been the shepherd. So you would be the one that would be on constant high alert. You would be looking out for new paths to take in case there was danger. You'd be entertaining everything, keeping everybody going. And I just thought that was such a wonderful way of kind of looking at it. It's like you kind of expect that it's, you're gonna have this way of life, and you don't fit, and you feel odd and out of it, and all that kind of thing. And then you chat to other people and you realize that perhaps you're just another element of that community that they really need.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's so many different variables within that community, but they're all needed.
Yeah. I've just looked out the window and it's snowing. Is it snowing where you are?
Oh yes.
Oh, thank you so much for talking to me.
Oh my gosh, I've spoken so much. I'm so sorry.
What? That was the whole point of it. You can find Jo on Instagram at themelias.co, and you can also find the photography workshops she co-runs with her partner James online, themelias.co. Please refer to the show notes for links. Thank you so much for listening to On the Irregular. It really helps if you can review and subscribe, as it helps other listeners find us and widen our audience. It truly does make such a difference.